Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you for another one. Episode 150, my friend. Did you ever think we would get here?
No. I did
not. How is everything?
There was a time where I wasn't sure if we were going to do an episode 2, so I'd say we've really done well for ourselves.
We've come a long way, and I'm happy that we are doing our first request of the Patreon era this week as we cover Flotsam and Jetsam's debut album, Doomsday for the Deceiver, which came out back in 1986. I'm sure you remember this. You were 4 years old at the time, but we'll get there in a second. Before we get there,
I was at Shea Stadium watching the Mets win the World Series while I was wearing my Flotsam and Jetsam shirt. It was
good time.
It was a good time.
I love it. I love it. Want to thank everyone who signed up for the Patreon. We really appreciate the support. I just wanted to put that out there. We did our first Patreon exclusive podcast as well as chat. So thanks to everyone who's again signed up. We hope you enjoy the content, and if there's anything else you would like to hear from us, please let us know, and we'll make sure to incorporate it as part of the Patreon. But
yeah, we know a lot about the 1994 Rangers roster. If you're interested in us talking about that, so.
That is true. And so we're going to have Joey Koster on as a guest on the next podcast. But before we get there, did you listen to anything interesting this week? Because I actually went back and I heard something that came out earlier this year that I missed. I want to talk about, but I want to give you the floor first.
Sure. We've been talking about this new Supersonic Revolution project that Aaron Lucassen is heading up, and they released another single. This one's the title track called "The Golden Age of Music." Another really good tune. Like, this is just really solid prog rock, and I've been enjoying these singles. I'm looking forward to the entire album to come out. And as far as albums go, I actually finally did some catching up this week. I'm not going to name everything, but I am going to give a shout out to two albums. One, thanks to listener, our friend Brian Clough, for recommending Saint Demon. They have a new album called League of the Serpent, and this was a band that just was not on my radar at all, and I ended up really enjoying this. And I don't know if have you ever had a band where you looked at the name of the band and just expected it to sound totally different just based on the name of the band, and then you listen to it and you're like, oh, this was not what I was expecting?
First time I heard Flotsam and Jetsam, I had that experience, but I'll get there a little bit later.
Yeah, it wasn't the seafaring type of music you were expecting, I suppose.
No. And Ursula did not make an appearance. But
that's too bad.
Did you think that Saint Demon was... So just by way of background, they played Prog Power a number of years ago. I think they were a fill-in band, if I'm not mistaken, or possibly even on the original roster. They're good. They're very melodic power metal, but not in like the Halloween vein. There's kind of like has a more modern sound to it. But I listened to the album as well. It was pretty good. I liked it.
Yeah, it had that Frontiers kind of vibe to it.
Like a polished power metal or something.
Yeah. I liked it. I liked it quite a bit. It really stuck out to me, so I wanted to just mention that. And again, thanks to Brian for the solid recommendation. And the other album I wanted to mention was Jason Bieler and the Baron von Bielski Orchestra. They have a new... as if that's like a group of people. Jason Bieler has a new album called Postcards from the Asylum. This was, he had, I think, pre-released a good portion of this album over the past few years as singles with songs like Heathens and Sick Riff and Human Head and Bear Sedatives. This is kind of the full release, and it's almost like a full 80 minutes of tunes, and there's so many different styles here. It's really interesting. There was a song that Flying Monkeys, which to me was like a Haken tribute. This was actually recommended to me from Knops, who was like, in his words, he said that I didn't give this guy a shot because I knew he was friends with Soto, and so I just didn't think it would be something that would be interesting to me. But he gave it a listen, and he ended up liking it, and he asked me if I heard it, and I didn't even know it was out yet. So I ended up really liking it. So shout out to Brian and Knops for the good recommendations. I also listened to the new Elven King album, Reader of the Runes Rapture, but I feel like I need to listen to this one a couple more times before I comment too deeply on it. It was solid, but it didn't really blow me away or anything like that. But I think that's one I'm going to need to go back to.
I was listening to the Elven King this morning at the gym. I got through about 3/4 of it. That tells you about how long I worked out this morning. But no, I thought it was I'll say this. It was a slow starter for me. I thought the beginning of the album was a little like meh, but then as I got into it more, I think the middle of the album and towards the back end, I actually really enjoyed. So like yourself, I need to spend some more time with this one. The Beeler album, you talk about hitting all these genres. It's fascinating to me because the guy used to be in like a hair band, and then all of a sudden now he's doing like this quirky rock prog thing. It's certainly all over the place. I am looking forward to seeing both him and Soto together doing a set at the end of the month. May 26th, they're playing New York City, but it's interesting. The place they're playing is this barbecue restaurant where there's a stage in the back. If two of my favorite things, live music and barbecue. So when you put them together, I have a feeling I'm going to enjoy that night and probably need somebody to wheel me out of there at the end. But I'm looking forward to it. They put on such a good show together in Atlanta during the Saturday noon gold badge sponsor show. It was just such an entertaining hour and change of music. I'm looking forward to seeing them again, kind of in my backyard. I'll head over after work. I have it on the calendar. I need to buy a ticket. But
it's literally in your backyard. You're going to be grilling and making barbecue for everyone.
I would not object to that at all. I'm not going to lie. It actually sounds like a good time. But that's a very, very interesting listen for sure. I wanted to mention two albums, one that just came out and the other one that came out about a month ago that kind of passed me by when it happened, but then I gave it a good listen and I was kind of blown away. The first album is a band called Ash Rain, and they have the album's called Requiem Reloaded, and it's a Japanese guitar player. I guess his name is Nozumo Wakai, and then he brought in musicians from kind of all over the place. The singer on the album is the current singer for Eternity's End, and it's just kind of straight up neoclassical power metal in many ways, and I thought the album was solid, but there's one track in particular which just blew me away. That doesn't usually happen anymore. Usually I'll either like something or not like it, but in this one, there was one real standout track. I'll post it this week just because I think people need to hear it. I'm not sure anyone's talking about this album. So that's Ash Rain. And then there's another band called Vesuvian out of Seattle, Washington. It's melodic death metal, but with heavy on the symphonic side. Really, really cool. When I listened to it, I thought these guys were from like Europe or something like that, like Germany or Italy. No, they're from Seattle, and I thought this album, Emergence, that came out about a month ago, was really, really good. So I'm going to try to post something from there as well. Just really, really good stuff from these guys. I think you'd enjoy it. It's digestible melodic death metal.
Well, grab your Starbucks, put on your Kraken jersey, and let's go.
Yeah, I think you're going to hear more from these guys. I was impressed. But without further delay, I spent the bulk of the week listening to this Flotsam and Jetsam album, Doomsday for the Deceiver. Now, was this your first exposure to the band, or had you heard stuff by them before? I was familiar with their last few releases, but they've changed their style a little bit in the recent years and over time, obviously, this being their debut album. So I didn't quite know what to expect when I played it. I was pleasantly surprised. But for you, was this your first exposure to them?
I listened to their End of Chaos album that came out in 2019, and I think I just listened to it one time. I think it was on your recommendation, as a matter of fact. Would I be wrong in saying that they were on one of your year-end lists at one point? Or am I thinking of somebody else?
No, I think that's possible. I have to double check, my notes to say for sure. Actually it was. I think it was that my best of 2019. They were in my top 50. I think they were like 45 or something like that. I really enjoyed that album, and I think that they're kind of an underrated band in many respects. They're doing more of a straight up metal thing, right? Like when you think of just like heavy metal, that's kind of their sound now. But back in the mid and late 80s, they were a thrash band through and through. And you can see the evolution, I think, as you go back and listen to the back catalog. So Charles Florio had recommended this album, one of our patrons, and he basically was like, you just have to hear this. And he is a huge thrash fan. So on his recommendation, I thought it was a really good selection for us, because this is, like I said, they've definitely evolved, but going back and listening to this was a trip in many, many ways. The album came out July 4th, 1986, so we're going back almost 40 years at this point. And the lineup is obviously...
Brian's 4th birthday. Yeah. I wonder if his mom got him this birthday.
I would be very impressed if when he was going through his dad's records, there was a Flotsam and Jetsam album. I think that would be interesting. But, just thinking back, like, the lineup for this band has obviously, changed considerably over the years. I mean, there are some members that have been kind of staples, but the one notable change here, a name that I think most people are familiar with, the original bass player for Flotsam and the bass player on this album, Jason Newsted, who would go on to fame in some other band that used to be a thrash band that has kind of evolved themselves, Metallica. So it's fascinating to me that he kind of really cut his teeth here, and then this kind of opened him up to much greater fame.
I had no idea that he was in the band prior to listening to this album. I don't know where Jason Newsted came from prior to this, but now I know that this was his. This is where Metallica poached him from. It's really interesting. This album, Cliff Burton passed away the same year, 86 or 87. So
yeah, well, I think it was 86 or 86, 85, 86. And, ultimately I think that, this album comes out in 86 and he wouldn't be long, obviously Metallica would get back on the road, and obviously in the studio, right. And recording in Justice for All, which would come out just a couple of years later. And it's interesting.
What was the reason for Jason Newsted's departure from Metallica?
So I've heard different things. I don't know that they ever officially said the real reason. My understanding was that it was almost like a musical differences thing, and he just wanted to kind of do his own thing. And I don't know if it was, some other projects that he had going on, which obviously, I think when you're in Metallica, that is always going to take precedence over your side projects and your other, your solo material and things like that. But it was just kind of like a mutual parting of the ways. I don't think there was any bad blood. I just think that he had been in the band for 15 years, literally from 86 until 2001. And he just said, you know what, I'm going to go in a different direction. And ironically, when you think about it, Robert Trujillo, who's been in the band for now 22 years, he's been their bass player for considerably longer than obviously Cliff and even Jason.
But yeah, it's funny how that works. It's just
time catches up on you.
Yeah, but Metallica's only released 3 albums with Robert, whereas they released 4 with Jason Newsted. Would have been actually 5 if he was on Saint Anger, right? So.
Was he on? Well, I know for a fact that he was on like the reimagined covers album that they did. So if you want to count that, and then obviously the S&M project as well. So different types of releases, but he was on quite a few albums, with them or what have you. And then obviously, albums are coming out fewer and farther between nowadays.
No, I stand corrected. He was not on Saint Anger.
That's what I thought. So I think that was kind of Robert's dipping his toe in there. And ironically enough, just an absolute abomination of a mix on that album. And we have somebody who is a friend of the show, shout out to Keith, who's been asking us to do a Saint Anger episode for the better part of, 2 years now. And I'm not saying I've ignored it. I haven't, but I just don't know that I can listen to it for an entire week.
Well, when he signs up for the Patreon and makes a request, then we'll take his request seriously.
That's right. So
money talks.
And that's about the only way I can sit through that album again, just because otherwise I'll just take a pen and I'll just bang it on my metal chair.
Somebody has had to have attempted to improve
redo the
it,
drums,
right?
I don't know.
I don't know. Like, there's a lot of talented people out there. Like, some guy on YouTube probably
Took the tracks,
like
put his own drums over it.
remix the album. So there's got to be a more listenable. I don't recall the music being so terrible. It's just that it's so unpleasing to the ear. Just like that. Oh my God. I would rather hear Oscar the Grouch bang on a trash can for an hour.
I'm pretty sure
like
that's what they did on the album.
Less offensive.
I think that in many ways, the ultimate irony would be if they redid the drums and they just mixed it completely differently and they put out the same album, probably their best album, but nobody's ever listened to it because you actually physically can't get past the abrasiveness of that drum sound.
Yep. What band were we talking about again?
Going back to Flotsam and Jetsam, the songwriting credits. I had mentioned Jason Newsted. It turns out that basically the entire band had a hand in the writing of this album. He wrote all the lyrics, which I thought were interesting. But you got Eric Knudsen on lead vocals, Edward Carlson on guitars, along with Michael Gilbert, and Kelly David Smith on backing vocals. Just a very, very solid lineup. And unfortunately, for one reason or another, this is a band that just does not really get talked about in the same way as a number of other thrash bands from the same era. And like I said, Eric Knudsen still in the band. Michael Gilbert still in the band. So the fact is, you got your same vocalist and the same lead guitarist for almost 40 years. The rest of the band has had some different incarnations over time, but I feel like these guys were not the A level of thrash when you compare them to their counterparts in 1986, right? Slayer was taking off. Anthrax was on top of the world despite your piss poor rating of Among the Living. And then obviously Metallica and Megadeth would soar to heights, incredible heights as well. And then Flotsam just kind of never, I don't want to say they never got out of the starting gate, but even when you compare them to bands like Testament and Exodus, I don't think they've ever drawn as well as those bands either, who kind of hit it big with certain albums in the 80s and early 90s. It's a fascinating story.
Yeah, I mean, there's only, I guess, so much room for that, genre. But, to be fair, Loudwire did a top 10 list of the best thrash albums that were not released by Megadeth, Metallica, Anthrax, or Slayer, and this album was actually ranked number 6. So once you get away from that crowded upper echelon and you start digging into a little bit more of what else is out there, which is clearly what we've been doing lately with Hellstar last week and Flotsam this week. There's a lot of other good stuff out there, and it is interesting though. I mean, I've always been aware of this band. I feel like I've always heard of them. They've always been around. It's just that I never really listened to them until just recently. But it's unlike Hellstar, who I hadn't heard of really. This is a band I've just always been aware of. They've always just, that name has always been in the lexicon, I guess, for people that are metalheads. But again, it's interesting. There was an interesting post on our Facebook Metal Exchanges group that someone had mentioned about the Hellstar episode, saying that when you don't have that nostalgia for something, it's almost like you can't get over the hump of absolutely loving it. You can appreciate what it meant for the time, and you can really enjoy it, but you, without that 20 or 30 years of it marinating in your brain, it doesn't get over that that legend hump, so to speak. Which was also Pat's nickname, I believe, at one point. And that's kind of how I feel about this kind of stuff, both Hellstar and Flotsam and Jetsam, albums that I enjoyed quite a bit, but at the same time, I wouldn't be able to give it a 9 just because I have absolutely no nostalgia for it. So, I became a fan of metal a solid 10 or 11 years after this album was released. So.
Right. And then didn't hear it for another 30 after that. So,
exactly.
So that all being said, I think that's a very impressive accolade from Loudwire insofar as, there's been a billion thrash albums that have come out over the decades, and some of them are very, very good, and some of them maybe not quite as good. But to be in the top 6 or top 10 or what have you, it's a very impressive accolade. And I have to be honest with you, having listened to this album a bunch during the week, I can see why. This was a really, really good album. And although obviously it lacks the nostalgia for us, I'll just kind of let the cat out of the bag. I really enjoyed this album. I really enjoyed this album. I'm kind of picky with my thrash. I don't love every thrash band that I hear, and I certainly like some more than others. But I thought that this had two things going for it that other thrash bands kind of sometimes miss. Number one, I thought that there were a ton of melodies on this disc. I thought it was easily accessible because the melodies jumped out at you, and it wasn't just thrashy for the sake of being thrashy. And there are bands even today that are just, it's just too much, and what it lacks in melody, it lacks in appeal for me. The second thing is these guys are underappreciated for their kind of technical mastery, because every one of these guys was kind of brilliant in their own way for their instrument that they played. Especially Jason, who, by the way, I know obviously he would go on to bigger and better things, but at the same time, he never, and I mean never, showed his wares in that 15-year stretch in Metallica like he did on this album. They grabbed him because when it came to proficiency, he was great. And I don't know that the Metallica albums, even, you can't hear him on And Justice for All, and the rest of the material after that was not as thrashy, not as intricate, so you didn't really understand or appreciate how good of a bass player he was filling in for Cliff. But on this album, you can see how good he was, and I can see why he was poached for the band.
I agree with you 100%, and I was impressed almost immediately. The album kicks off with this. It reminded me a lot of an album that came out right around the same time, the way that Walls of Jericho by Halloween starts, where it's just kind of here's a bunch of instruments making a bunch of noise. Let's get started. And then there's a really impressive bass riff that starts right at the very beginning of the song, and it's he stamps his style and his chops right from the get-go. It's there's a bass player here.
Yeah, and I mean, Hammerhead is quite frankly one of their, I think, biggest songs off of the album, and they didn't really hold back, right? They kind of went full throttle right from the get-go here, and the album opens with a 6-minute track. It's funny, you mentioned Walls of Jericho, and I totally can understand why. To me, I actually hear Hit the Lights by Metallica, which is ironic, obviously, but that, the way that album starts with just this droning riff that just picks up steam. I loved it. I thought it was maybe even a nod to, Kill 'Em All, which had come out just a few years prior. But the guitar work on this track just jumps out at you. In a way, it's a little bit different for me than the rest of the album, because I thought this one had a kind of a early new wave of British heavy metal feel to it, almost like an Iron Maiden Killers or something like that, whereas the rest of the album I thought was just more thrash in terms of 80s thrash. I immediately said, this guy reminds me of the singer reminded me of Di'Anno on Killers, but just with better range and, quite frankly, just a much better vocalist. The track was almost a touch misleading because of that, because I think the rest of the album sounds different, but there's this rawness to it, or something endearing about it, that I just absolutely loved. And it feels shorter than the 6 minutes and 15 seconds that it actually runs.
Yeah, very well said. This is one of my favorite songs on the album. Not my song of the week. This was a really hard choice, actually, for me for song of the week, because I thought that all the songs were really good, and they all had their own kind of flavor to them in a lot of ways. I didn't find that this was a 60 minutes of pretty much the same samey kind of music. It might have felt that way the first time, but then the more I listened to it, the more like I felt like there was a lot of layers and a lot of different things going on. It's a lot deeper of an album than you would expect from a '80s thrash album, in my opinion.
I agree.
I really like the Iron Maiden Diano years comparison. This is just a really energetic, like, just it's thrashy, but like you mentioned earlier, this band has melodies, and like I always harp on about that. Our Anthrax discussion was that for me that was what the big thing that was missing for me was the melodies, and I loved that this band was not afraid to show that they had a little bit of a melodic side. And like you said, same with the technical side too. It's a really great mix of thrash, technical, and melodic metal all kind of rolled into one, with a little bit of power metal and traditional heavy metal and a little new wave of British heavy metal,
like
too.
A sprinkling, it doesn't. Those other genres don't overpower you, and for me, with the exception of this opening track, it's a thrash metal album, but then they season it, right? They put in a little power metal salt, a little melodic metal pepper, and like a little paprika from the traditional heavy metal side, and then it just kind of marinates together into this interesting thrash album. And like I said, it hit the mark for me. What did you think of the second track, Iron Tears? This one starts off with these like primal screams, which just kind of show off, in many ways, Knutson's vocals, which are, it's wild because he still goes wild. I've seen them live, and he can still hold his own for sure. What do you think about this second track?
The vocals on this album are excellent. I really liked Eric Knutson's vocals. I wonder if there's any relation to former Columbus Blue Jacket Espen Knutson, but probably not. But anyway, I really like this song too. It's like almost half the length of the previous track. It's really just get in, get out, thrashy, fast, like. But I like this one quite a bit too. What did you think compared to Hammerhead? How did you feel about this one?
Again, different. This is more traditional thrash. It's like thrashy, but it has this galloping feel to it throughout. It reminds me of Metallica's Motor Breath, which is this short, catchy, but certainly thrashy tune, which low-key one of my favorite Metallica songs. And what impressed me, or what kind of attracted me to this, was something that a lot of bands were doing at this time, or I guess maybe not doing, and that's why this was attractive. But there were these little guitar noodlings throughout. I wouldn't call them solos, but these little like noodlings throughout, which kind of, I don't know, helped drive the song forward while it had this gallop to it. I thought it was just a creative way to make this just a little bit different. It's a tight little song, certainly more straightforward than Hammerhead, but I liked it a lot. And to your point, I had a bit of a difficulty kind of coming up with a song of the week on this one. I had a couple in mind. This was not one of them, but I definitely enjoyed it. And it's interesting because you have some songs that are real kind of long epics, and then these other shorter tunes that are sprinkled throughout as well. One of which is Desecrator, which also comes in at under 4 minutes. It almost takes over seamlessly from the prior track, but it just comes in. It just builds up speed so fast. I love the vocals on this one, and this is one of those songs that you just bang your head from the opening note. It's heavy, but the chorus, very, very catchy and melodic. And the guitar solos on this, like the bona fide guitar solos, really wild, kind of like off the rails wild, and I loved it. I just thought it hit the mood perfectly, and it was one of my Song of the Week candidates, probably my second or third favorite song on the album.
One of the things, and I don't know if I'm just becoming a little bit more open to this thrash style, but like I find myself, especially with this album, if I'm sitting at my desk, I'm bouncing my feet around like I'm playing a double bass drum. Like it's the funniest thing because I don't have a lick of musical talent, but I just found myself like really just getting like you said, like in kind of a headbangy sort of, like I feel like this would be a blast live, like to see this kind of thing live, like after a few drinks, just get onto the floor and just headbang your ass off and just try to avoid getting steamrolled by the inevitable, circle pit. But I thought this was another solid tune. I think I liked Iron Tears a shade better than this one, but this was another good one. There's definitely a vibe of that mid '80s, U.S. thrash metal kind of scene that I think shines through on some of these more thrashy, less melodic type songs like this one. But I agree with everything you said about this one. This is another solid tune.
I think the ultimate compliment you can give is just what you said, right? Like wanting to, or even doing a fake double bass drum at your desk while you're listening to it. To me, I feel like that's the energy that they're going for. So if that was your takeaway from a lot of this, I think that is a huge compliment, and maybe the biggest that you can give. It's
also less destructive than picking up a pair of sticks and beating the shit out of your keyboard and mouse and making your day's work impossible to do.
Live on Patreon, Chris destroys his office. What's interesting to me is that the next track comes in at not only just over 2 minutes, but it's called Fade to Black, which, if anybody knows, there was a very famous song that came out, a year or two prior to this on Ride the Lightning.
Who was that, Kenny G?
Yes.
Oh.
It was the famous Kenny G track. This was just an interesting song title, in my opinion. A slower tune with these, again, like wild screams on top. It reminded me of a band that we've never talked about on the podcast, but a band called Riot, who played Prog Power last year and has been around for decades. But I had this, if you're familiar with Riot's discography, it reminded me of Swords and Tequila, the song, just for some reason on this. The drumming is great. The dueling guitar solos is great. The only miss for me here was that I don't love the backing vocals, but otherwise a solid tune, I think.
Well, I believe that the band's pronounced Riot. Shout out to Knox. He knows what I'm talking about. The first, the way this song kicks off, it sounds like a radio song. Like, it sounds like almost a classic rock kind of tune. Like, it's a pretty understated guitar opening, and then it just picks up in the middle and it just starts to go apeshit. It's
all in 2 minutes.
This is the kind of song that, if somebody was just not familiar with thrash and you kind of wanted to give them a little taste of what it is, this is something. It doesn't overstay its welcome, clearly, at 2 minutes and 5 seconds. This is it's kind of like all the things that make thrash metal fun, all kind of rolled into a really tight package. This is something I would probably just say, hey, give this song a listen. It'll only take 2 minutes out of your day, and if you don't like it, well, I just saved you, another 58 minutes.
I like it. And I think there's something to be said for albums around this time where they were not hitting you with 70 minutes worth of music. Now, obviously, I think if you buy an album, you want to get your money's worth. So I appreciate that. But there's something to be said for these 42-minute albums or 45-minute albums on the long side. I don't know, there's something to be said for me for just you get in, you get out, you enjoy it, and then you move on to the next thing. It doesn't have to be long just for the sake of being long.
This album is almost an hour.
Yeah, it is. I'm just saying, you're absolutely right, but I'm just saying there's something to be said for those 42 to 45 minute albums, that, which were the commonplace at this time.
There's only 10 songs on this album, but a few of them are
long.
Pretty long.
Yeah, and the first of which is Doomsday for the Deceiver. This track is well over 9 minutes, the title track, and it's the first of two big epic songs back to back. It's the close of side A and the start of side B back to back. This is a very meaty song. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I really like these next two songs, which is kind of surprising because I'm I feel like Metallica started to do it with Saint Anger, speaking of which, where they started to make longer thrash songs. And it's interesting because I don't think Metallica did a very good job at it. I felt like they I'll take the song Saint Anger as an example. It's like this 8 or 9 minute song, but it's like the same 3-minute song that just loops twice, 2 more times.
Unlike,
Whereas
say, Master of Puppets or One, they did do a good job with certain tracks, to be fair.
Right.
But to your point, as time would go on, they would continue to make longer songs. Quite frankly, they would do even more.
And I'm speaking solely to the Saint Anger time, because I just felt like that album had a lot of songs like that were long for the sake of being long. You know, another band that I feel like was guilty of this was Dragon Force. Not so much on their first album, Valley of the Damned, which we've discussed, but I think on like Sonic Firestorm and maybe a couple albums after that, it was like, why are there 8 or 9 minute songs of like this speedy power metal? It's like, it doesn't need to be this long. These songs, though, have like parts to them where it actually feels like it's building to something, and it's not just a 8 or 9 minute repeat of the same 2 or 3 minutes. And that's what I think really made these 2 songs enjoyable. The beginning of Doomsday for the Deceiver has this, you'll probably know the song better than me, but it has a very 80s Metallica vibe.
It reminds me of Fade to Black, ironically enough,
yes,
which is ironic because they just named the song Fade to Black 2 minutes before this. So really ironic. But yeah, I heard the exact same thing with that like slow acoustic guitar intro. Really cool. Yeah.
So it's like a 2 minute kind of that vibe, and then it picks up, everybody else starts to kick in, and it's a more of a mid-paced song compared to most of pretty much all of what we've heard up to this point. And it works. It works really well, I feel like. It's, I'm finding a hard time trying to figure out what to compare it to. I'll leave that job up to you, but it has this 2 minute like Fade to Black-esque intro, a really solid just mid-tempo middle portion, and then it kind of goes towards the end where you're seeing that technical side of things with the technical guitar work. And this song is just has a lot going on, and it's never boring. And I was really impressed when I looked at this. I was like, oh god, a 9 minute thrash song, what the hell is this going to be? And it ended up being really good. What did you think of this one?
I loved it. I'll be honest with you, it's my song of the week. I've got a lot of thoughts. Let's give it a listen. When we get back, I'll tell you why I selected it. So here's Doomsday for the Deceiver. Hope you enjoy it.
All over the earth, the whole begins. This kind of circumstance. Fire bombs, empty flash, big threats of blast. In a moment, the world flash. They're in the midst. Stands Deceiver, wearing a brooding smile. Surrounded by his mock believers, the master's lover's gone. Evil's reign, called by the prophets, under a darkened sky. Assassins everywhere, unlocked survivors, sacrifices demons dance. Suddenly, the whole town silence by the rumbling planets. Metal beats soon to appear, to challenge the enemy, to be the zoom, to write the devil's death.
So the reason I chose this album is for a couple. This is my track of the week, is for a few reasons. I love the intro, even though I think it was a nod to Fade to Black. But by the 3 minute mark, this song just takes off like a rocket ship. And I actually think the way they composed it reminded me a lot of Anthrax, which I'm shocked that you liked the song, because that's what I hear. I hear Anthrax. I hear Joey Belladonna's vocals. And then I hear some of these ridiculous high notes, and I'm just like, damn, how is he singing like this? You know, I mean, it was really impressive. But I love the diversity here. I love the melodies. And in many ways, it was just like a proggy thrash song. And I'm like, just checking all the boxes for me, right? And then towards the end, I think it has a Ride the Lightning, the song, vibe to it. It hit all the chords for me. And I gotta be honest, I think I liked it more than Metal Shock, which is like the next epic tune, although certainly good in its own right. But I preferred Doomsday to Metal Shock. What was interesting though is all of a sudden, out of nowhere, keyboards make an appearance, which is like, wow, I was certainly not expecting that. And this one, much like one of the tracks we spoke about last week on the Hellstar album, this has almost like a horror feel to it. And I think, I don't know if that was on purpose or what, but like even the name Metal Shock, it has like this dark horror element to it. But more than anything, what impressed me is I thought for a second I was listening to old Savatage, like the way this song starts. And I was like really curious as to where it was going to go. And naturally it goes like full on thrash assault in the kind of Exodus Testament vein, with an underrated bass solo. I mean, my God, the bass solo on this song is great. This is to me one of the first tracks where Jason Newsted just completely shined. And I do enjoy how it kind of slows down a little bit towards the middle and then picks up. And there are parts during the instrumental section where I actually had a bit of a Holy Diver feel, even though it's a thrash song. A lot going on here. An interesting track. I wonder, when you compare the two epics back to back, which did you prefer?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say something that might be potentially upsetting, but all Savatage is old Savatage at this point. when a band hasn't released an album in 22 years,
duly noted. It's
all old.
I can't argue with that.
But no. I'm glad you asked me that question because it's perfect, because this is my song of the week. I think Doomsday for the Deceiver was arguably my second favorite song, so I'm right there with you, but this song was just a hair better for me. I love the creepy horror-esque intro like you mentioned. It does kind of have like a kind of Savatage kind of vibe. They did add a kind of piano like overlay, so to speak. And then the high pitched vocals, you just get that scream and the song starts and you're thinking to yourself, all right, we're going to have another one of these, mid tempo songs like the previous track, Doomsday for the Deceiver. But wait, no, all of a sudden it's like, snap your finger and then it's like, all right, now we're thrashing all the way. It just picks up and it's just this really this like roller coaster. Like it gets fast, it slows down. Like it really had like so many elements of the style that I enjoy, and I just found myself really gravitating towards this song whenever it would come on. And I just think it's hilarious that on a thrash album from 1986, we've chosen by far the two longest songs on the album that in a way are kind of progressive, just in the fact that there's different parts to it. And it's not, like I mentioned before, like one long song of just the same thing repeating. It's actually, both songs are very unique and original from start to finish. But this one for me just really stood out. So let's give it a listen and we'll carry on.
Reach out, I am this.
as we come back and give these tracks a listen, between the two of us, I think this is kind of ironic. Between the two of us on this almost 40-year-old thrash album, we picked two songs that come in at over 17 minutes combined. So if you decide you want to listen to our songs of the week, and we recommend that you do, we post them on all our social media, you're basically listening to almost half the album. So I found that to be very fascinating, but a really interesting choice, especially coming from someone that is not a self-proclaimed thrash fan like yourself. Very, very interesting. The album itself finishes off in the last four songs are kind of fascinating, all in their own right. The next track, She Took an Axe, the seventh track, is kind of one of the more simple, almost clean tracks, I would call it. I thought the drums were fantastic. I thought the bass lines were great, and they worked very, very well together. Of all the tracks on the album, I think this one grew on me the most. I didn't care for it so much after the first listen, but by the end, cheesy lyrics aside, this one really kind of grew on me a lot. And I thought that there were these interesting use of like these little sweeping guitar solos throughout. This is now a second time that they've kind of done this. But a cool little track, I have to say.
It made me think that maybe we need to do a Lizzie Borden episode one of these weeks.
I was thinking about that too, and this made me think of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to say, we talk a lot about song orders on albums and stuff. And I think that for what this album is, I thought they did a really good job of like having some really high energy songs to start, having these two really epic songs that have like a lot of different a lot of different parts and slower parts here and there, and then finishing off with another like energetic bunch of songs. I think it really fits because it's kind of like you just start off energetic, you kind of get a little bit proggy in the middle, a little bit more chilled out as far as a thrash metal could go, right. and then with this song it kicks back into these a bit slower, or a bit not slower, a bit shorter tunes, and I think that it's kind of almost like it's going back to where the album started,
right?
So I think that's really good. I don't think I would change anything about the order. Like if this was not a thrash metal album, I would say like, oh, it's weird that they put the two epic songs right next to each other in the middle. Because like on a power metal album or a prog metal album, I don't know that would have made a lot of sense. But a thrash metal album actually works really well. So I on a macro level, I really liked how the album was, just how it was set up that way. But yeah, this was a good tune. I think I liked the first four tracks better than the last four tracks, personally. But I still think this is a really solid collection of songs at the end here.
I tend to agree with you, with one rather large exception, but we'll get there. I will say it was not the next track, ULSW, which stands for, and I'm not making this up if you've never heard of it, but Ugly, Lying, Stinking Wench. Maybe the best title of any song we've covered in the last 150 episodes. Maybe. I'm just putting it out there. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on this? I've got some, but I want to hear your first. What do you think of?
It made me think of Chris Jericho making fun of Stephanie McMahon when he would call her a disgusting, brutal, stinking, bottom-feeding trash bag hoe.
I would not be, hear me out for a second. We having we've met Chris Jericho. We know that he loved power metal from Europe in the 90s and stuff like that.
He probably definitely was a fan of Flotsam and Jetsam.
Do you think he got that promo from this song? I would not be completely surprised if this was an inspiration for that. I'm not kidding you.
We might need to hit him up on Twitter and ask and find out.
I think that might be right. What are your thoughts on ULSW, the song, not the promo?
Another solid tune. I think it's right on par with the previous tune, She Took an Axe. again, like I thought that like Hammerhead and Iron Tears and Desecrator felt like they had more of a identity amongst themselves, whereas I feel like these last two tracks kind of feel interchangeable. Just my 2 cents on it. Enjoyable, speedy, thrashy, but I didn't like it as much as some of those earlier tunes. I'll just say
I had in my notes that something about this song was a bit of a miss for me. I had said that it was like listenable, but that it was well placed kind of at the back of side B. And then I listened to it one more time yesterday, and I said to myself, well, the vocals are good, and I do enjoy the guitar solos, and like there was some awesome drum fills on here. And then by the end, I'm like, you know what? I kind of like this song. So I did a bit of a 180 on this. At first, it was probably my least favorite song on the album. Now I like it more than I did for sure. Not my favorite, but I've come to respect it. I'm like, if I like all these parts, I guess when you put them together, you have a pretty good song, because I liked everything about it. It's just for something, I guess it missed the first couple of times. And then we get to another kind of dark track, Der Fuhrer, which is like, it's kind of like this dark, melodic, extended guitar solo in many ways, at least to start. Though, you know, I mentioned earlier how I heard Motor Breath, the song on this album. This is kind of like Motor Breath on steroids. Again, I don't love the liberal use of the backing vocals here, but at the same time, I feel like it's one of the songs I would want to see live the most, because if they were really tight and could play a song like Der Fuhrer live, I think it would be really interesting. And to be honest with you, I think they could have ended the album with it, and you would have said, very good album. But they didn't, and we'll get to Flotzilla in a little bit. But what did you think of Der Fuhrer?
This was probably my favorite of these last three. I'm not going to count Flotzilla because Flotzilla is an instrumental tune. So these last three tracks, this was my favorite of the three, and it should be dark. It's a song about Hitler,
Yeah.
but it should be noted that it's not a
tribute
celebration or a tribute to Hitler, which might have disqualified the album as even being discussed on this podcast if that were the case. But was actually more of just describing him as evil and demon-like. But interestingly, Flotzilla is not on the vinyl LP,
Wouldn't have fit.
It's possible that a lot of people, when they heard this album, this was the last song that they heard. And I would agree. I would tend to agree with you that this could have been and was the last song on some of these albums, but there's something about Flotzilla being the last song that just works for me, because it's like this long ass thrash outro that I don't feel like, I mean, you'd know this better than me, but I don't feel like this is something thrash metal bands typically do to end their albums, with this 6-minute and it's like just full of energy. It's everything that makes thrash metal enjoyable.
Well, it's interesting.
So
I think,
I don't know if I'm cutting the line here if you were done talking about the previous track, but I kind of like this as a way to kind of end things.
So it's interesting. No, I have more to say about Flotzilla, to be honest with you. It reminds me of the way that Ride the Lightning ends with the Call of Cthulhu, which is like this almost 9-minute instrumental track. But at the same time, Flotzilla is a true thrash song, whereas the Call of Cthulhu is kind of like this, I don't know, proggy, I don't know how you describe it, but it's not really a thrash song in the sense that you would normally think. This shouldn't work. They shouldn't be ending an album, in my opinion, with a 6-minute jam session where every instrument has a chance to show off. It's heavy, it's fast, it's kind of march-like in spots. A very unique way to end the album. And to be honest with you, the last 2.5 minutes especially, it reminds me of some video game soundtrack, and I can't put my finger on it, but there's a Nintendo game there that actually, I think, adopts this same music.
I think it's Contra.
Maybe that's what it is, but it reminds me exactly of that. And now I got to go listen to the Contra soundtrack because I just can't stop hearing it every time I listen to this song. In a way, it was almost my song of the week. I love this track, and I thought it was a really novel way to end the album, but I did think that the vocals deserved to be heard by everyone, and that's why I didn't choose it.
Yeah, like really well put. I feel like towards the end of the song, there's kind of like the guitar. The guitars almost have kind of like an Iron Maiden kind of flavor to them. This is just really cool. Like, it didn't overstay its welcome, which is surprising for a 6-minute instrumental thrash song.
At the end of the album, no less.
Cool tune.
Yeah.
Sorry that?
I was going to say, no, a 6-minute instrumental at the end of the album after you've listened to 50 minutes worth of the music. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't feeling like I was antsy for the album to end at this point. I mean, I thought it was interesting. I'd be curious to know if really it was just a matter of it didn't fit on a record, and that was the only reason that it. Because you see a lot of this in the '80s, where when CDs were first starting to become a thing, you'd find. I think of Manowar's Kings of Metal album as an example of that, where Pleasure Slave was a track that was not on the original vinyl, or Gutter Ballet by Sabotage, where Thorazine Shuffle was another track that was I don't know if it was on the cassette, but it was definitely on the CD and not on the vinyl, just because they had more space and they were able to throw an extra track on there. So I'm wondering if that's really all it was, because bands, I think, were hesitant. Now nobody gives a shit, but back then bands were hesitant to release a double LP. Like it was typically saved for live albums, or Bruce Springsteen's The River. Yeah. But other than that, it wasn't super common. So I think, especially if you're really talking about like there's one song that needs to be cut off. Clearly they went with the one song that doesn't have any vocals on it, but I always find that kind of interesting as this sign of changing medium in the 80s, where CDs were starting to become a thing, but and cassettes were pretty standard at this point, but CDs were also super expensive at this point. So like I think that if there even was a CD release of this in 1986, like very few people probably bought it right away. But yeah, it's interesting.
A couple of more notes, and then I'll ask you for your score. Number one, I think we were smart. We did listen to the remastered version of this album. I think that if you go back and you listen to the original pressing, it's a little rough, it's a little raw, and it's a little 1986. So without a huge budget behind it. So the remaster, they did an excellent job on that. And I will say this, I've had the pleasure of seeing them live. I saw them on 70,000 Tons of Metal back in 2020. They played a couple of songs off this album. They actually played Hammerhead and Desecrator when I saw them. Very, very good. I didn't know what it was at the time. I just took it as part of their set, and they have such a massive discography that I wouldn't have known everything anyway. But I thought they put on a very good live show. And the word I always use to describe them is like professional band. Like this is a band that is very tight live, despite the complexity to some of this music. So really cool. I urge everyone to go see them live if they come around. They do tour the U.S. on a semi-regular basis. But all that being said, we've gone nearly an hour. I'd love to know your thoughts on terms of score of 1 to 10. What are you rating this album? And I have to think it's higher than you probably would have guessed going into the week.
You're right on. I'm going to give it a 7.5. I gave Hellstar's Nosferatu album a 7 last week, and I feel like this, for me, was a shade better, or a shade. I enjoyed it a shade better. I don't know if I could put it into eloquent words as to why. It just worked. I think those two middle tracks, though, really kind of pushed it over that hump for me. And again, like, we always go back to the Anthrax discussion, but when the melodies are good, and like that's kind of that really pushes me into more of an enjoyment when it comes to thrash metal, and this was surprising, and I guess the only reason I say that is because like I really didn't have any expectations because I didn't know the band at all, or at least very well at all, especially their older stuff. And honestly, like because of the nostalgia factor, I'm always a little bit wary of if the requests, Charles listened to this album probably when it first came out or shortly thereafter, and so there's definitely a nostalgia for him. And so sometimes I get worried that people's nostalgia is overtaking the actual like quality.
Hey,
of the album,
listen,
and then,
I'm guilty of that.
and then I listen to it and I don't like it, and then I feel bad. But that wasn't the case here.
But also we do try to keep it honest. But I think we often look through rose-colored glasses at certain albums that were part of our nostalgia.
Absolutely.
That being said, for me, this was an 8.25, which is like a really, really high score for an album that like I didn't grow up on, and probably one of the higher scores that I've given for an album that I've never heard going into the week. I really, really enjoyed it. I don't think it was perfect. I'm not going to put it up there with Rust in Peace, which to me is still probably the high watermark for a thrash album. But it is a very, very enjoyable listen. And I'm going to go back and listen to some of the other material that they've done early on in their career. Although I think that the presence of Jason Newsted and his technical proficiency in many ways gave this a leg up on some other material that might be in the catalog. I'm just assuming there, but very, very good listen. And I've got an album for next week that I want to talk about briefly before we go, but a couple of tours that I'd be remiss not to mention. The first, we know that Vola is coming to Prague Power, but they're doing a U.S. tour in and around that show. They're doing a U.S. tour starting in Florida on Wednesday, the 6th of September. They're going to be here for about 3 weeks, ending the tour in Austin, Texas. I got to be honest with you, dude. We have to do a Vola episode between now and Prague Power because I am so looking forward to seeing them, and I'm really curious to see if I can get you into them prior to that festival. In other words, will you be joining me for that show?
Yeah, that's we talk about this every year of what I feel like I need to bone up on, so to speak, and we've done episodes for that very goal.
Sure.
And it worked for Pain of Salvation's Perfect Element album. I felt like I was not super familiar with the raps, Luca Turilli's or Turilli Leone. How many raps are there? There's a lot. So I chose that album, which they ended up not playing any songs from anyway, which was kind of ironic. But yeah, I suspect there will be a Vola episode later on in the year before Prague Power, because that's just a band I haven't really listened to. It's not that I don't like them; it's just that I don't know them. So and being that they're billed pretty high, and I know people that I greatly respect, yourself included, who are huge fans, I'm going to have to definitely give it a listen. But I also think there's going to be some other bands that are playing at Prague Power this year that we'll be doing episodes about during the summertime, as we've done in the past.
I agree with that. Another band that I think you are very familiar with, who's doing a U.S. and North American tour, is Beast in Black. They just announced their tour basically after Prague Power. They'll be playing in Atlanta, leaving the next day for Richmond, Virginia on September the 8th, hitting many major markets all the way through October 15th, where they end their tour in Florida. Good for them. They are slowly gaining a lot of steam, and I'm happy for them. They deserve it. I just am so excited to see them live. And ironically, those are two bands we'll be seeing back-to-back the Thursday of Prague Power. So I thought that was interesting. And lastly, I don't know, another band that I guess has announced their U.S. tour, and that's Camelot, doing a run of shows in August and November of this year, starting in Silver Springs, Maryland on August 17th, stopping in Atlanta, and then ultimately ending the tour in Orlando, Florida on September the 9th. this is a band that is a professional touring band at this point. They seem to be doing regular tours, but the new album has reinvigorated me when it comes to going to see them live. I'm not saying I would have skipped the set. I wouldn't have, but I don't know that I would have necessarily been looking forward to it. But now I'm going to enjoy it because I think the new album is very solid.
Right there with you. I also wanted to mention too. I mean, it seems like a lot of bands are kind of using Prog Power as a launch point for their U.S. tours, but I believe Cynic just announced that they're going to be doing a tour. I don't know if it's based around Prog Power, but they'll be playing on day one. Windrose is going to be joining Rhapsody of Fire on their North American tour. So it sounds like a lot of bands that are going to be here for Prog Power have decided to stick around in the U.S. and do some additional shows. So
which is great. I mean, if you're going to come, you may as well make it worth your while. So more power to them.
And also, one other Prog Power related thing I'll mention is the Cryptex, who is opening on Friday night of Prog Power this year. They just announced that they'll have a new album coming out in late September. So I'm wondering if they'll play any of that new material at Prog Power. That's another band that I definitely need to dig into because I feel like I'm going to really end up liking them. So
I heard that we were going to play
another
considerable music from that album at the festival, kind of like a world premiere type of thing. So not only will the album be available at Prog Power, but they will be playing some music off of it during their set. So that should be interesting to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. It's the more and more I look at this Prog Power lineup, it's really shaping up to be really enjoyable. And then there's like bands that I just forget are playing, like Mirath or Visions of Atlantis and Unleash the Archers. I'm just like, holy crap, like damn. And then like you had mentioned Green Carnation recently. I forgot about them. There's just a lot of good stuff here. I'm pumped, there's some good stuff. A lot to look forward to, and like I said, we'll be discussing quite a few of these bands as we get closer to Prog Power. I think I was a little bit down on the festival when the Power Quest thing happened, but now that I've kind of made my peace with that, I can, get excited about everything else because there's plenty to be excited about. Before you get into what we're going to talk about next week, I'm kind of wedging this in here because it just came in, but I didn't want to sign off without reading it. But Charles kind of sent over a quick blurb about Doomsday for the Deceiver, so I'm just going to give it a quick read. Released on July 4th, 1986, Doomsday for the Deceiver is hands down one of the greatest debut metal releases of all time. British metal magazine Kerrang gave it a 6K rating. This rating is higher than they normally give. Oh, maybe Dave Meltzer knew something about that. This album has thrash, power, and progressive metal all melted into one awesome listening experience. The death of Cliff Burton was a shocking blow. In my opinion, when Jason Newsted left Flotsam for Metallica, the band was never the same. His bass playing on Doomsday is brilliant. Flotsam has released a ton of great metal in their career. Their latest CD, Blood in the Water, is great. That being said, Doomsday stands alone as their apex release, Flotsam Till Death. So thank you, Charles, for the request and that little blurb. We enjoyed covering it and look forward to. We have another album that you have requested that we'll get to at some point, but keep the requests coming. We appreciate it. And yes, now please regale me with what we will be listening to next week.
So we've done a couple of heavy 80s thrashy, borderline power metal albums. I wanted to slow it down. And unfortunately, I think in retrospect, I think I may have slowed it down too much. But I want to talk about a band that we've never covered and a band that I've never really given time to, possibly because they just stopped recording albums when they did, for reasons I'm sure we'll get into. and possibly just because at the time that they were huge, I was listening to more power metal, which is like the antithesis of this particular band and the music they released. And the album I want to talk about is October Rust. The band is Typo Negative, and the album came out in 1996. It is, and when I say the antithesis of thrash, it is slow, gothic, doomy stuff that is just a really stark departure from a lot that we've listened to. So I would just ask you to go into it with an open mind, because I think you're going to get the melodies. I just don't think it's going to be as fast as you're used to. And this is a meaty album. The album clocks in at about 72 minutes, but I think that the diversity here will be very, very interesting. This is widely regarded as their best album for most people. Obviously, reasonable minds can differ, but yeah, we're going to go back to 1996. We're going to talk about October Rust, and we'll do a deep dive into Typo Negative.
This is great because another one of those bands that I just never really knew, like, you know, always heard of them, never heard them, that kind of deal. And I remember my cousin was really getting into metal in the mid to late 90s, very briefly, and then he kind of swerved and became a massive hip hop fan.
That's a hell of a swerve.
Yeah, but he had this little brief, you know, even before me, I think. And I remember him always speaking really highly of Typo Negative, and he was actually the one who gave me my first Metallica albums. He gave me his copies of Kill 'Em All and the Black Album after he you know, switched over to the dark side. So I'm looking forward to listening to this. This is really just something that I'm not really familiar with, and I'm excited because I really have no idea what to expect.
I do, only because I had the pleasure of seeing them live unexpectedly. It's a story for another podcast, but it's going to be an interesting week. I'll tell you that. But thanks to everyone for joining us. If you like what you heard, give us a like and a follow. We appreciate it. Consider joining the Patreon. Send your requests in if you are on Patreon, and we'll catch you next week with some Typo Negative. Chris, my friend, this was fun. I look forward to doing it again. I will talk to you soon.
Yep, and just want to shout outs to Nick and Amy, our latest Patreon subscribers. Thank you for your support. We look forward to getting to your requests, which we have put into the official spreadsheet. So you're in. We'll get there. But yeah, thanks. You know, it means a lot to us, the support that we've been receiving. So we'll continue to try to give you the content we think you deserve. And like Justin said earlier, please send any suggestions, or if there's something that you think we could be doing better or more of or less of, feel free to let us.
Appreciate it. Enjoy the week, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care, buddy.